thanks for coming. Tonight's shir was sponsored L'schus refuah shalema v'chaya ruda Yehudis b'asar aleya. May she have a complete and total refuah very, very quickly. B'toich shar choli Yisroel. And thanks for that dedication. Another dedication was by Jared Newman. This is in honor of his brother's birthday, Max Newman. Birthday is going to be this Thursday. Noach Newman, may he have a shnas bracha and hatzlacha and a very, very special, amazing good year. A year of great growth, prosperity, and lots of hatzlacha. Another dedication tonight was by Anonymous, and this is for special brachas that he needs. Yeshuas and open, revealed miracles. May Hashem provide for him the miracles that is so much needed in the schus of this great mitzvah. The CD and Shir this week were sponsored by Zalman and Esther Roth, and this is in honor of Zalman's father's yahrzeit, which was this past Sunday, Yud Sivan, Yaakov ben Zalman Leib. May his neshama be elevated to the greatest of heights, and may he channel down lots of blessings to you, to your family, and all that you need, Begashmias and Beruchnias, many, many, many brachas. Thanks for this dedication. And by David Kagan from Western Kosher. That was another CD sponsorship. This was in honor of his mother's yahrzeit, Sarah Gittel Basar Bavram, whose yahrzeit is coming up this Sunday, the 17th of Sivan. May her neshama go higher and higher and higher to endless heights. May she channel blessings to you, to your family. May you be reunited with her very, very soon with the coming of Mashiach. I want to dedicate the shir also to my grandfather's great-grandfather, whose yahrzeit is today, or on Yud Gimel Sivan. His name is Yecheskel ben Reb David. He was a very, very special man. May his neshama be elevated to the greatest of heights. May he send lots of brachas down to everyone, to the center, to all, and may he have lots of nachas from all the good work that's happening over here. May this bring him a great aliyah and joy for his neshama. We are now, this week's Parsha is Parsha's Behaaloecha. In Parsha's Behaaloecha, we read, there's an interesting, something that makes it different than every other Parsha in the Torah. If you go through the Parsha, in the middle of the Parsha, there is in the Torah, a place where there are two backwards nuns. And the two backwards nuns, the sages say, and in between them are two verses, two psukim. This is in the end of Perek Yud, at the last two verses of chapter Yud in Parsha's Behaaloecha. There are these two nuns, and what they serve is, as the sages explain, Chazal explain, that this is serving like as brackets, even though they're the opposite. Yeah, they're like brackets, and they serve, and they're meant to segregate these two psukim in order to indicate that these two psukim are not part of Sefer Bamidbar, but rather they constitute a Sefer onto their own. This is another book of the Torah. A book of the Torah, the book of Vayihi ben Ha'ari, which comes out, according to this, that there aren't just 5 books of the Torah, there are 7 books of the Torah. We have 4 regular Sfarim in the Torah, and then Sefer Bamidbar, which is divided in 3. The part until Vayihi ben Ha'ari, then these two psukim constitute an entire Sefer, and the latter part. So which brings us to the 7 books, which are 7 Sfarim, Bereshit, Shmos, Vayikra, which is Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. Then you have the book of Numbers divided in 3. Up the first 10 chapters constitute the first Sefer Bamidbar. Then the book, Vayihi ben Saya, is its own Sefer. Then from the pasuk from Perek Yud Aleph, Vayehi Amka Misayin, and the people were like complainers, until the end is the 6th book of the Torah, and the 7th one is Devarim, Deuteronomy, which is the last Sefer in the Torah. So, and it's interesting that distinction of the Torah being in 7 takes place in Parsha's Behaaloecha, where the main mitzvah is the lighting of the menorah, and the lighting of the menorah has 7 lamps, and the Torah is compared to the lamps. So it's the 7 lamps of the Torah, the 7 lamps of the menorah are the 7 Sfarim that there is in the Torah. What is this very interesting, small little sefer in the Torah, which again, it's tiny in comparison to all the other svarim. This is a tiny, tiny little sefer. Again, it's made up of only 2 psukim. We need to understand what is its theme. What does it represent? What does it stand for? If it has assumed for itself a position, if it has assumed for itself an importance of an entire sefer, it's not just a paragraph. It's not just a chapter. It's not even a parsha, a sedra in the Torah. It is an entire sefer. That means that its message must be vast, even though in terms of quantity, it's very small. So we need to understand what is its vital message, what is its energy, what is this sefer Vayhi ben Saya all about. The Kli Yakar asked the question, and he says, first, for just one moment, what is these 2 psukim? What are they? These are the verses that people are very familiar with, even those who attend shul only once in a while. These are the verses that are said when the ark is opened up, whenever the Torah is taken out. And in many shuls, when the Torah is put back, we say these 2 verses. The first pasuk is Vayhi ben Saya ha'oren vayoma Moshe, that when the ark would travel, Moshe would make a declaration. This was a form of prayer that Moshe would say. Kuma Hashem vayafutzu avecha, arise Hashem vayafutzu avecha, may your enemies be scattered. V'yanusu misanecha, and those who hate you should flee mipanecha, from before you. On a simple level, this is referring to when Jews were traveling in the Midbar, and there were the Jews in our history who've always had those who disliked us. So there were those who might have been a threat to the Jewish people, and particularly a person is vulnerable when they're traveling. So when the Jewish people traveled from place to place, Moshe Rabbeinu was davening to Hashem that Hashem should protect the Jewish people from their enemies. That just in case there are those that are lying in ambush that might want to hurt them. So we're saying that where he's davening that Hashem should cause them to scatter, to run away, and the like. The second pasuk is of Behaaloecha Yomar, that at the time of the resting, Moshe would say, Shuva Hashem, return Hashem. Because during the journey, the Shekhinah left the Mishkan, left the encampment, and went in front of the Jewish people to travel for 3 days ahead of them, to lead the way and to direct them where they need to go. Now, when we've reestablished, when we're setting up camp, Moshe Rabbeinu would invite the Shekhinah back by saying, Shuv Hashem, Rivavais Alpha Yisrael, that Hashem return to the thousands of the Jewish people, come live with us. That is the content of these 2 psukim. But the question is, why is this an entire sefer? It's a nice prayer, an important thing, but why an entire sefer? The Kli Yakar says, what he was really bothered by is he says every sefer in the Torah has mitzvahs. Torah is all about mitzvahs, instructing the Jewish people of how to conduct themselves in this world. This sefer doesn't have even one mitzvah. So if it doesn't have a mitzvah, what gives it the legitimacy of being a sefer in the Torah without having a mitzvah? The Kli Yakar answers a beautiful answer, which we're not going to get into right now. Let us see if we can find another element, another aspect to the depth or the meaning or insight into what this parsha is all about, and why is this the only mitzvah-less sefer in the Torah. So what is its soul? What is it all about? So to understand this, let's delve a little deeper into the actual meaning of these verses, of these psukim. Moshe Rabbeinu was davening, and he says, Kuma Hashem, get up Hashem, rise Hashem, v'yafutzu oivecha, your enemies should be scattered, v'yanusu misanecha, and those who hate you should flee mipanecha, from before you. Simple. Hashem, get rid of your enemies. Destroy our foes, those that might be a threat to the Jewish people. The question, however, here is, why the repetition? Why is he repeating it twice? Kuma Hashem vayafutzu oivecha, may your enemies be scattered, v'yanusu misanecha, and those who hate you should flee mipanecha, from before you. That is the same thing. Enemies, those who hate, it's the same. How? It's just saying the same thing in other words. The Torah is generally very careful with its words, doesn't splurge with words. Why is the Torah doing that? Saying this in its repetition. So the Even Ezra, one of the classic commentators on the Chumash, the Even Ezra says that is the style of the pasuk. Whenever the pasuk is going into poetry, whenever we're speaking about prophecies, like he gives the example of Bilam. When Bilam prophesizes, the order, the style changes. The linguistic style of the Torah changes, and that is the way a poet speaks. It's in order to make the words more beautiful sounding. He says that's the way you have it by prophecies, you have it in shira, in songs, and also sometimes in a prayer. And that's the reason why, and that's the meaning of the repetition. Meaning it's really saying the same thing in other words, just to make it sound nice. Rashi, however, is of the opinion that that's not the case over here. Rashi explains that v'yanusu v'yafutsu oivecha, that your enemies should scatter, v'yanusu misanecha, and those who hate you should flee, are talking about two different types of foes, two different types of threats that there are to the Jewish people. And Rashi says as follows, I made copies of it, so you can look inside. This is in Pasuk Perek Yud, Pasuk Lamid Hey. It's the Rashi on the top, on the upper part of the Rashi that's on your copies over here. The Rashi on the bottom is a Rashi from a different Chumash, which I added on just to show a contrast. We'll see about that soon. But this is the upper Rashi, the first Rashis. So this is the first heading of Rashi on the page. Vayafutsu oivecha, may your enemies be scattered. Rashi says, who are we talking about? Hamechunasim. This is referring about the enemies that have congregated, those that are together, those that have gathered together to harm the Jewish people. If there are those that are sitting together, contriving, trying to figure out ways of harming Yidden, harming the Jewish people, so the meaning of a Yafutzu Evecha is that they should be scattered. V'yanusu misanecha, they should flee. The next Rashi, they should flee misanecha, those who hate you. Elu haroitvim, those that are actively pursuing. So the way the commentators understand the difference between the two at first glance is the commentators explain it like this, that there are those that are gathered together to plot against the Jewish people, to contrive ideas of how to hurt them, but they're not actively engaged in an assault. They're not actively yet engaged in confrontation. That is the oivecha. Those are the initial enemies. Hamechunasim, they're gathered together. For them, what is necessary is just to scatter them. The Gemara says that kinus of tzaddikim, a gathering of tzaddikim, no lahem is good for them, v'no la'olam, it is good for the world. A gathering of wicked is bad for them and bad for the world. Like we see the UN, a gathering of which is only causing problems in the world, it's obviously not a gathering of very good people, which doesn't bring too much goodness in the world. So, therefore, this gathering needs to be scattered. Just scatter them. However, the second group that we're talking about are those that are taking an active role in waging war against the Jewish people, those that are involved in actual pursuit. To them, vayanusu, we're asking Hashem to cause them to flee, to turn around and run away from what they have been doing. That's the way Mefarshim explain what Rashi is saying. V'yafutzu oivecha hamuchunasim, those that are gathered. V'yanusu misanecha elu haroitvim, these that are pursued. Okay, it seems great. We're ready to go on to the next Rashi or to the next pasuk. However, we know that when we learn Rashi carefully, we have to take a look and look at the nuances. See, Rashi is quoting two different types of, or Rashi is bringing over here an explanation on the word ovecha and the word misanecha. And here he says what it means, and here he says what it means. However, there is a slight difference between the two. It seems to be tiny and minute, but it is a difference. In the first Rashi says, Rashi says, ha-michunasim, those that are gathered. That are gathered. That's it. That are gathered. In the second Rashi, misanecha, Rashi, v'yanusu misanecha, Rashi says, elu haroitvim. Those are the ones who are pursuing you. One added word. In the second Rashi says, elu, these are. One might shrug it off with the shoulder and say, big deal, Rashi wasn't just being careful, he was just writing things quickly, and that's why he wrote it that way. You can't say that, because Rashi is quoting a Sifri. If you look into the source, into the Sifri, Sifri clearly says, on the first Rashi, Sifri defines it, Elu ha-mechunasim, those that are gathered. On the second pasuk, on the second half, on the second words, the Sifri also says, Elu haroitvim. Those are the ones that are chasing. Rashi intentionally changed from the Sifri, misquoted the Sifri, in bringing the word Elu only the second time and not the first time. And as we're going to see soon, this makes a huge change in the understanding of what Rashi is saying. Okay, we continue on with the next Rashi. Rashi says, Misanecha, those who hate you. So Rashi says, Elu Saine Yisrael. These are those who hate the Jewish people. Who are the ones who are hating God, who hate Hashem? Elu Saine Yisrael. These are the ones who hate the Jewish people. Shakola Saine Es Yisrael, because whoever hates the Jewish people, Saine Es Misha Amar V'Hoya Olam, hates the one who said, and the world should come into being. Shanemar, as it says in the Pasuk, Rashi makes a very astounding statement, that if someone hates the Jewish people, they're hating God. And that's what the Pasuk means. That let those who hate you run away means those that hate Israel. Because hating the Jewish people is hating Hashem. Rashi has to bring a proof to this. Shanemar, as it says in the Pasuk, Umisanecha, and those who hate you, Nasu Rosh, they have reared their heads, they're lifted their heads. And the Pasuk continues, Al Amcha Yarimu, so Rashi says, Umiheim, these two words, Umiheim, is an interjection which Rashi is putting his own words. Who are those who are called Misanecha, those who hate you, that Nasu Roish, that they are rearing their head? What does it mean, your enemies, or those who hate you are rearing their head? That what? Al Amcha, on your people, Yarimu Soid, they contrive in secrecy. What does that mean? That means that because, and as a result of their contriving against the Jewish people, the pasuk in Tehillim, in Perek Pei Gimel, Psalm 83, refers to them as Misanecha, those who hate you. So that's a clear proof that those who hate the Jewish people are considered God haters. That is the comment of Rashi. Now, even though this is a very enlightening idea in regards to the nature of anti-Semitism, that the essence of anti-Semitism, which is a hatred to the Jewish people, is a hatred to Hashem, is a hatred to God, the question is, however, what prompted Rashi to say this, to teach this to us? Rashi doesn't just give us nice insights. He's a mefarish. He's explaining the pasuk. What was provoked him into this explanation? What was wrong in this pasuk? So the Mefarshim say again. They say what Rashi was bothered over here is that we are clearly, in our pasuk, we are talking about people that are enemies of the Jewish people. How do we know we're talking about enemies of the Jewish people? Because that's the content of Moshe's prayer. Moshe is davening right now because now the Aron is going off. The Aron is journeying in the Midbar. The Jewish people are going to follow, and there might be chas v'shalom, some kind of danger looming upon the Jewish people, like we find in the Midbar, that there were those who were lying in the caves, in the clefts of the rocks, waiting to attack them on a surprise attack, and Hashem made a miracle causing two mountains to come together and crushing them. So we do have stories of enemies of Israel that were there, and it could have been more other terrorist groups that were sitting and laying in ambush, waiting to harm the Yidden. So Moshe Rabbeinu is requesting and asking God for Hashem's protection. That is the meaning. And by the way, when it says over here that the Aron would travel before that, parenthetically, what Aron are we talking about? So Rashi says, just a few on the Heben Sayah Aron, right earlier, or Psukim before that, where it says that the Aron went in front of them, Rashi says that this is not referring to the ordinary Aron, the ark where the luchos were, where the tablets were, because those luchos were not traveling in front of the Jewish people ahead of them. Rather, that was carried by the Leviim, and they were carried in the middle of the machane, in the middle of the camp. We're talking about a special Aron, which was holding the broken luchos. Because what happened was like this. When Hashem gave Moshe Rabbeinu the luchos on Yom Kippur, after the second luchos, after Moshe broke the first tablets, Hashem gave him the second tablets, which was given to him on Yom Kippur when God had forgiven the Jewish people on the sin of the golden calf. So now, Hashem instructed Moshe Rabbeinu to, at that very time, on that very day, to build a Mishkan. To tell the Jewish people to build a Mishkan. The construction of the Mishkan, well, it took some time. And the Jews did not erect the Mishkan until a half a year later, until Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And this was on Yom Kippur. So you have an entire winter, fall and winter, that the Mishkan wasn't there. So where did they put the luchas? So they made a makeshift aron, in which they had both the broken pieces, the shivrei luchas, the first luchas, and also the second luchas. Now, however, once they constructed the Mishkan, when it came the month of Nisan, and they had the new Mishkan and the aron that Betzalel made, they transported the luchos, the new luchos, the second luchos, into that, and the broken luchos remained in this aron, in this makeshift aron, and this aron would travel in front of the Jewish people by remote control. It would traverse in through the hills and over through the desert. It was amazing. It would just go ahead of them on its own, and it was destroying everything, anything that was endangering the Jewish people. Both spiritual dangers, spiritual forces of darkness and evil, satanic forces and demons that were there, snakes and scorpions, and also if there were any enemies that were there to hurt them, this is what this aron did. So clearly, when Moshe Rabbeinu was talking about Vayiben Soya Aron, and he's davening to Hashem, and he's saying Vayafutzu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha, but what are we talking about? We're talking about the enemies of the Jewish people. So Rashi is bothered. What's the question? Rashi is bothered. Why are these people called misanecha, those who hate you? They're not hating God, they're hating the Jewish people. So it should have said, V'kuma Hashem v'yafutzu oiveinu, let get up Hashem and let our enemies be scattered. V'yanusu misaneinu, those who hate us. Why does it say misanecha, those who hate you, when he's referring to those that are opposing us? So Rashi explains it's the same thing. Because if you hate the Jew, you're hating God. Because Hashem and the Jewish people are one. So that's what Rashi wants to explain by telling us over here, Misanecha elu Seinei Yisrael. This is the way Mefarshim explained it. The problem is an obvious problem. If that's what prompted Rashi to make his pirush, then Rashi should have instantly, right at the first half of the pasuk, when it says Vayafutzu oivecha, Rashi should have explained who are the oivecha, who are your enemies. Your enemies are why they called Hashem's enemies. These are the ones who are enemies of Israel, enemies of the Jewish people, and they are called God's enemies. For some odd reason, Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi doesn't make any comment on the enemies, who the enemies are, that they are those who hate the Jewish people. He waits only to the second part of the pasuk, where it says Misanecha, and over there Rashi pipes up, and he says Misanecha, those who hate you, those who hate Israel or hate Hashem. Why didn't Rashi, if you're writing the Pirush, you would make the comment the first time it's necessary on the word Aivecha. Why refrain till the Misanecha? And not when you have the same thing repeated twice, just in different words, you leave out the comment the first time and you make it the second time. There must be a reason. So Mefarshim say that Rashi, as the Sifsei Chachamim in the name of Kitzur Re'im, he says like this. True, Rashi could have made the comment already on the word Oivecha, right at the beginning. Rashi, however, intentionally waited, refrained from making the comment on Oivecha, and waited for the word Misanecha, those who hate you, because on Misanecha, Rashi had a proof. He had a raya. He had a proof. Why? Because over there he has the pasuk. What's the pasuk? It says, Umisanecha nasu roish, and your enemies have reared their heads. And who are those enemies? Al amcha yarimu said, on your nation they contrive in secrecy. So since Rashi had a direct proof on the word misanecha, he had a proof. But on the word oivecha, he didn't have that proof. Therefore, he waits for the misanecha, and over there he explains that it's talking about those who hate the Jewish people are the ones who hate God, and we can already apply the same thing to Oivecha on our own. And that's how they explain it. It's a very beautiful explanation, and we would be ready to continue learning further unless you take some time and do a careful analysis, and you open up the source of Rashi, the pasuk that Rashi brings, and you go Gewalt. The pasuk that Rashi brings, Misanecha Nasuroish, from Perek, Pei Gimel in Tehillim, the words right before that say, Ki hine oivecha yehemoyun. Behold, your enemies are in an uproar. Umisanecha nasuroish. And those who hate you have reared their heads. That means you have the same pasuk that says oivecha misanecha, referring to God's enemies and referring to those who hate Hashem. And what does the pasuk say at that very end? What's the next pasuk? Why are they called oivecha? Why are they called misanecha? On both of them, al amcha yarimu soy. On your nation, they contrive in secret. So the very same proof that we have on misanecha is also there on oivecha. So why would Rashi rather bring as a proof that misanecha, say his pirush on the misanecha, and bring a proof to misanecha from Tehillim? He could have said his pirush on oivecha, and said and brought the pasuk ki hine oivecha, and proven from there that those who are enemies of God are enemies of the Jewish people. So it makes no sense to say that it was because of that. To make matters worse, to make this even a bigger problem, not only does it say so in Tehillim, but Rashi himself, in an earlier comment, in Parshas Behaaloecha, Rashi already comments that what is oivecha, who are the ones who hate, who are enemies of God, those who are enemies of the Jewish people. Rashi said it clearly already. And which pasuk does he bring? That very same pasuk in Tehillim. Oivecha, why are they called oivecha? Because alamcha yarimu soy. This is in the Shira and Oz Yashir, the song that the Jewish people sang when they went across the sea. So over there, I've made a copy of the Rashi over here. This is on Pasuk Zion, in the Shira Sayam. It says Taharos. You see the Rashi, Taharos, on the second column of the bottom Rashis. Taharos, it says over there, with the abundance of your greatness, Taharos, you destroy Kamecha, those who get up against you. So Rashi is bothered by the word Kamecha, those who get up against you. And Rashi makes a comment. I'm not going to read the first line of the Rashi, but let's go in the middle of the Rashi. And who are those who get up against Hashem? Elu akamim al Yisroel. Those are the ones who get up against the Jewish people. What's the proof? Again, there it doesn't say not oivecha and not misanecha. There it says kamecha, those who get up against you. Rashi asks the question, who are those who get up against Hashem? Kamecha, get up against you. Those are the ones who get up against the Jewish people. And so it says, which pasuk does Rashi bring as a proof? Your nations, your enemies, are in an uproar. And what is the uproar? On your nation, they contrive in secrecy. And because of that, he calls them enemies of Hashem. So Rashi had already stated explicitly that oivecha is who? Those who hate Hashem, hate the Jewish people, hate Hashem. So if so, what would have been Rashi's problem in Sefer in Bamidbar, in Parshas Behaaloecha, when he comes to oivecha, he could have made the same comment, right over there on the word oivecha, based on what he said already earlier, and then we would apply the same thing from oivecha to misanecha. Those who are your enemies and those that you hate. So this really needs, again, we can learn the Rashi's fast and we don't have any problems. Everything is nice, but obviously careful analysis saying that Rashi is saying something much more than just what we're seeing on the surface. We have to dig a little deeper and see. Perhaps we don't understand the Rashi at all. So now let's. So the Armafarshim, interesting. Who they want to offer, the Maskil, the David, the Be'er Yitzchak, their offer of, and they're bothered by this question. How come Rashi didn't make the comment on Oivecha? And he makes the comment on Misanecha. So they offer, and they say like this, on Oivecha, the word Oivecha, which means your enemies, we could have translated it, that Oivecha doesn't mean your enemies, meaning those that are opposing you, but Oivecha means who you hate, your enemies. Vayafutz Oivecha means those that are Oivim Hashem, who Hashem dislikes. not those who dislike Hashem. That's what we would have been able to learn on Ovecha. And then we wouldn't have to explain, who are the enemies that Hashem dislikes? Whatever, Hashem dislikes troublemakers, bad people in the world. That wouldn't be a problem. But that would have been good on Ovecha. But when it comes to Misanecha, if it would mean those that Hashem hates, not those who hate Hashem, but those who Hashem hates, that God hates, then it should have said Son Echa. The proper word would have been Son Echa, which could be meant those that you hate. If it says Misanecha, the words Misanecha means those that hate you. So once you come to Misanecha, those who hate you, Rashi's wondering, who are the ones who hate Hashem? Those are those who get up on Yin. That's why Rashi makes the comment over there. That's their explanation. Good explanation. The problem, however, is for two reasons. We can't say that. First of all, we can't say that we would assume that Ovecha means those who you hate Hashem, because Rashi had already told us in Shemois, in the Shira, that Ovecha means those who hate God. So then we know that Ovecha mean God's enemies in the sense that people who have animosity against Hashem. Not that. Number one. Number two, clearly in our psukim, we're not talking about Hashem destroying evil people in the world, because in the context of the Parsha, what's the context? Vayibin Soya, or in Moshe's davening, that Hashem should take care and destroy the enemies. Obviously, we're talking about enemies of the Jewish people, not meaning those that are coming to fight us, not who Hashem has an account to settle with. It's people that are, and that's why Moshe is davening for them. So because of the context is clearly that Ovecha means those that are our enemies, and over here too, Rashi should have and could have explained that it means if those are enemies against Hashem, they're enemies also against Hashem. If they're enemies against the Jewish people, they're also enemies against God. Therefore, because of all of this, we have to say that when it comes to Ovecha, Rashi had no problem at all. Rashi is relying Ovecha on what he said already in Shemois. Rashi is assuming that you learned already Sefer Shemois. And if you're learning Bamidbar, you learned already Yechum Shemois. You remember what he told you then, that what is called an enemy, the enemies of the Jewish people, is an enemy of God. Where Rashi had a problem was Dafka by Misanecha. Misanecha, Rashi had a hard time. Rashi couldn't just assume that we will make that assumption and say, those that hate Hashem, that is, who hate the Jewish people, hate God. We'll see why that's a problem. Because just and simply we can say, why not? If the enemies of the Jewish people are enemies of God, then those who hate the Jewish people hate Hashem. Why should there be a difference? But we'll soon see that there isn't. On Ovecha, he doesn't have to say it because Ovecha Rashi is comfortable that you're going to figure it out based on what he said earlier. But Dafka Misanecha makes a problem. And therefore Rashi has to spell it out. Now those who hate God, those who hate the Jewish people hate God. So to understand why that is, let us first notice a very interesting difference between Rashi's take on this whole matter and the seriousness of anti-Semitism and the source of Rashi. As we said earlier, that this is all, Rashi's taking this from the source, and the source is the source of a Mechilta. But before we do that, I want to point out another few nuances, which once we get to the explanation, we're going to see the Rashi is so beautiful, and how every word of Rashi is a diamond and a gem. Looking carefully, and again, this might look a little bit like nitpicking, but really, if you think about it, Rashi must have had reasons for all of this. First of all, the term that Rashi uses over here for Hashem. Rashi says, whoever hates the Jewish people, so may hates Misha Amar V'Hoya Olam, the one who spoke and said the world should come into existence. Come on, you don't have an easier way to describe Hashem. This is the most roundabout way to speak about Hashem. Misha Amar V'Hoya Olam, the one who spoke and said the world come into existence. Rashi mentions Hashem's name by saying HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rashi in Shemois says Hamakoim, Sona Hashem. Whoever is Sona, the Jewish people, is Sona Hamakom, hates Hashem. Rashi has to spend 4 words, Mi Sha'amar V'Hoya Ha'olam, to tell us about Hashem. There must be intention why Rashi chooses Dafka, that name of Hashem, that he is Mi Sha'amar V'Hoya Ha'olam, over here in reference to Hashem. Another thing that we could notice is, and this is a difference between the Rashi in Beshalach and the Rashi over here. Again, in both places, Rashi is describing that a Jew hater is a God hater. Okay, that the two are similar. There's however a difference. In our Rashi, in the word misanecha, Rashi goes directly into his explanation. Who are misanecha? Who are those who hate misanecha, who hate you? Elu Soine Yisrael. These are those who hate the Jewish people. It's clear, direct. If you look in the bottom, in the other Rashi, in Parshas Beshalach, Rashi says, "Akamim negdecha," those who get up against you. Rashi asks a question. Umihem akamim kenegdo, and who are those who get up against Hashem? Elu akamim al Yisrael, those who get up against the Jewish people. Which means Rashi presents this idea in a manner of a question and an answer. Now you might say, okay, it's just a different style. He's in a different mood. Okay, he's writing this at a different time. He's writing this one year, and he's writing this a year later. And how long it took Rashi to write his Pirush on the Chumash? And it's just a different style of language. But again, that's a cheap way of getting away with it. There is really, when Rashi writes, he's first of all, he's writing with Ruach HaKodesh, and every word is accurate. Why is he doing that? Over here, he seems to be comfortable, without any question. It's without a doubt. Elu akamim al Yisrael, those who get up against the Jews. Over there, it's a question. Who are those? Those are those who get up with you. Another interesting difference is, by us, Rashi uses the word shenemar, as it says. See? Shenemar u'mesanecha nasurosh. Rashi over there says, v'chein hu oimer, and so he says. Something that no one will ever be medayik on. Okay, big deal. Shenemar v'chein hu oimer. Come on, it's the same thing. V'chein hu oimer, so he says. Shenemar and shenemar. But really, there is a difference. If we're going to look carefully soon, there's a difference between using the word shenemar v'chein hu oimer, and Rashi chooses his words carefully. Why over there he says shenemar, and over here he says v'chein hu oimer. So the idea is, so all these things will come together by first analyzing one thing, and that is that when Rashi discusses the severity of anti-Semitism, Rashi makes a small, slight change from the Sifri, and that little change really makes a huge difference. In the Sifri it says like this, Kol hasoine Yisrael, whoever hates the Jewish people, ki'ilu, it's as if, soine, he hates, Lemisha Amar V'Hoya Olam, to the one who spoke and the world came to existence. By the way, that phrase, Misha Amar V'Hoya Olam, that does say in Sifri. Sifri also refers to Hashem as Misha Amar V'Hoya Olam. But again, the Sifri says, Ki'ilu, if you hate the Jewish people, it's as if you hate God. The Mechilta in Shemos, see, in Bamidbar there is Sifri, that's the Medrash on Bamidbar. The Medrash on Shemos is Mechilta. In Shemos and the Mechilta, the same thing. The Mishnah, over there it says Hakamim, Mihem Hakamim Kenegdo, those who are Keneged, who get up against the Jewish people. And over there it says the same thing, Shekol, that anybody that gets up against the Jewish people, Ki'ilu, it's as if he's ganging up against God. Ki'ilu. Rashi omits the words Ki'ilu. Rashi says, Misanecha Elusaini Yisrael, Shekol hasoine es Yisrael, anybody that hates the Jewish people, soine hates as Misha Amar V'Olam. It's not considered as if. It's not a severe, right? There's no ki'ilu. It is that way. Hating a Jew equals hating God. And that's a world of a difference. It's one thing to say that Hashem says, if you despise my friends, if you despise my children, if you despise those, if you are hurting, or if you persecute, if you inflict pain or suffering, or God forbid, even worse than that, upon those that I like, I consider it a violation. I consider it as if you're waging war against me. Okay, we understand that. That Hashem takes it very, very seriously. But, which means on the that it's possible, it's hypothetical, of course it's possible, that you have people that are believers in God, they believe in Hashem, and they are maybe even worshiping Hashem, serving God, and yet they hate the Jewish people. Today's days, we have probably the greatest religion in the world, billions of people that are deeply devout in their service of God, they believe in Hashem, in one God, and yet have a deep hatred against the Jewish people. Now, of course, we have to be very careful not to make generalities. There are probably many good Muslims that don't hate the Jewish people. But there definitely are millions that do have a deep hatred against the Jewish people, even though they are, at least from their perspective, God's best friends and God's advocates in the world. So Hashem is saying, listen here, you can't have that. If you mess with my children, if you mess with Israel, you're messing with me. It's considered as if you're messing with me. That's the idea of ki'ilu. It says, right? But it's a whole other thing to say that the hatred to the Jewish people means that you hate God. Hating Israel, fighting Israel, is fighting Hashem directly. It's not as if, it's not as serious as if. It means that. Because when you're hating the Jew, the truth of it is what you're not saying, what you're hiding, what you're concealing. Maybe you're embarrassed to say it or uncomfortable to say it, or maybe you yourself don't even know that that's really what's motivating you, is that it is a war against God. It's a hatred against Hashem. That's what Rashi is saying. Because the Jewish people are connected to Hashem. They are, and meaning in other words something like this. Hating the Jewish people has no other basis but for hating them because we belong to Hashem. Because the Jewish people are a pretty good people. We have our troublemakers, we have our issues, but comparison to the rest of humanity, the Jewish people have done so much for the world, have contributed so much in everything in the world of medicine, the world of science, the world of technology, the world of the arts, in everything, in knowledge, in morality, so much what the world, in terms of philanthropy and charity and givingness and fighting for liberty, so much that the Jewish people have given. Why? There is no explanation for the hatred. Why? Okay, you know what, we have our criminals, we have our troublemakers, but that is minor in comparison to all the good the Jew has given for the world. So really there is no other explanation why Jews are hated. And it has puzzled people throughout history. Why anti-Semitism? What is it? They hate the Jew when the Jew is rich. They hate the Jew when the Jew is poor. Every time there is another reason why the Jew is hated. Why? The leftists hate the Jewish people, and those that were on the right helped the Jewish people. The socialists hated them. The fascists hated them. Everybody hated the Jewish people all the time. Why? And that is because we are God's people, and it's a hatred to God. It's and that's what Rashi is saying. And for that reason, Rashi had a problem, and he had a difficulty when it came to say that about those who hate Israel. Because now we have to differentiate, now we have to step back a moment, and let's try to understand the difference between ovecha, which means enemies, and misanecha, which means hate. See, these are two levels of opposition. One much deeper than the other. You see, ovim, the definition of an oyev, right? An oyev means a enemy. Okay, what's the definition of enemy? The definition of the Hebrew word oyev is someone who is actively engaged in confrontation. Someone who is right now doing something against the other person. That's called an enemy. Where do we find that? Meaning in life, anything. Someone who is suing you in court, that's your enemy. It doesn't mean that the person has a deep-rooted hatred and that all day long they're contriving of how they can destroy your life. Someone who has a confrontation, someone who's now at odds with you and in conflict, that's called an enemy. Different kinds of enemies, subtle enemy, big enemy, but it's either a physical war, a legal battle, or whatever it is, that's the enemy. It's referring to the action. We're talking about the behavior element of a confrontation, of a conflict. Soneh means something much deeper. Soneh means someone who is harboring a hatred in their heart. Someone who has someone that is despising, someone that has a deep-rooted animosity. How do we find that? The pasuk says, do not hate your brother in your heart. So we see that that the word sinna is referring to the hatred in the heart. Because there's another pasuk that says, when it talks about someone who killed someone by accident, how do we know that it was by accident? Maybe he's only playing and making believe it was by accident, but really it was intentional. So the pasuk says, we're talking in a case when we know that that this person did not hate this other individual mitmol shilshon from yesterday, the day before yesterday, which is telling you that when we're talking about hatred, we're talking about something that is accompanying the person all the time. He hates the other person deeply. So even though, in a sense, we might think that the oyev is worse than the soneh, because the oyev is engaged in active combat. The soneh is engaged only in, it's an emotion, a feeling, it's an inwardness of that. It's not necessarily actualized, but the soneh is much worse. Because the soneh is out to get you in every situation. He's sitting, and no matter if one thing fails, he'll try something else. And he's not perturbed, he's not bothered by something particular that's happening that is bothering him. It is not a particular element, it's the very you that he wants to uproot, that he wants to destroy. The oyev is right now has been provoked. Someone gets upset at you that you are at night, that you have people over at your house on Friday night, and you're singing late at night. You're having some kind of a party, malava malka, music, and you're up late, and your neighbor goes and calls the police. Well, obviously he's not your best friend. Maybe a decent, good friend or a nice person. You would go over, knock on the door, and say, can you maybe, keep it low or try to calm down? That would be the decent thing. That's probably what I would do if my neighbor would be making noise. We try to ask them, or maybe forget about it. I think everybody's entitled to make noise once in a while, as long as it's not all the time. So if someone goes and calls the police on you, so you know that they're not your friend. And the fact that you're Jewish is not helping out the situation. Does that mean that the person is an anti-Semite? No, it's not an anti-Semite. Does he love Jews? No. Is the fact that you're Jewish helping in this provocation? Probably yes. But you're not going to say that he's a deeply anti-Semite, even though they're making a problem. But sometimes you have someone on the block who cannot stand that a Jew lives in the neighborhood. And therefore, in every possible situation where he can make tzaras, where he can make a problem, he's doing it. Everything. He fights everything. And you see, he's always contriving. And even though maybe we'd like to believe we live in La La Land and everything is so nice and beautiful, but it's not true. There are some times, and we can't be paranoid, and sometimes there are Jews who go the other extreme. They think everybody's anti-Semite. Everything they're anti-Semite. It's not true. But we can't dismiss the fact that there are people that dislike Jews deeply, that have a deep anti-Semitism in their heart. It is someone who is a soneh. He hates, all the time hating, with a deep hatred. That's the difference between an oev and a soneh. So now we're going to go to our Rashi and see the difference, the first difference that we had in our Rashi. When Rashi said, Elu, these are, when it comes to ovecha, Rashi says, Ham mechunasim, those that are gathered. And Rashi omitted the word Elu ham mechunasim. He just says ham mechunasim. When it comes, however, to the second Rashi, when it comes to v'yanusu misanecha, Rashi says Elu harot. And the answer, and the reason is like this. You see, when Rashi says rodef doesn't mean someone is running after you. When Rashi when he says so in misanecha means rodef means someone who's pursuing you, pursuing in the sense that he's out to get you, he's on your back. It doesn't refer to the action. It's referring to the attitude, to the desire to destroy you, the desire to get rid of you. That's the idea of rodef. So Rashi is now defining what does misanecha mean. What does misanecha mean? Someone who hates you. Someone who hates you means someone that is engaged, involved, invested in the pursuit, in the destruction. And that's the idea of, therefore Rashi says, Elu, you should know, what does misanecha mean? The definition of the word misanecha is, Elu, these are rodfecha, people that are actively pursuing and bent on the destruction of the Jewish people. However, when it comes to the first thing, ovecha, your enemies, over here, ovecha doesn't mean, and And what does ovecha mean? People that are engaged, involved in practical conflict, who are doing something against you, right? Well, that case, Rashi can't say that it's elu, that is hamechunasim, those that are gathered, because it's not always, people don't always fight you when they're by being gathered. Sometimes it is strategically better to be gathered in order to defeat, to launch an assault. Sometimes it's strategically better to be scattered. For instance, let's take a look at the enemies of Israel today, who have a country like Iran, and they have a huge military. They're gathered together with a huge arsenal of weapons. Rahman al-Islam, their thought should never come to fruition. So these is a nation gathered together as an enemy of Israel and threatening the Jewish people. But then there are others who harm the Jewish people precisely by being all over the place. Terrorist cells that pop up in random different places all over, not gathered together, and that's their strength. That's called guerrilla warfare. So, therefore, here's the thing. Ovecha, actively involved at a war against the Jewish people, doesn't mean mechunasim, those that are gathered. It could be both. Why do we say over here it means mechunasim? Not because ovecha means mechunasim, they're gathered, but because it says vayafutsu ovecha. Vayafutsu means they should be scattered. If we're asking they should be scattered, there's a sign that what kind of war are we talking about? What is the enemy and what position is the enemy? The enemy must be in a position of being scattered, of being together. That's why we're saying he should be scattered. That's why Rashi doesn't say elu. These are amechunasim. Because it's not the definition of the word ovecha, that ovecha means mechunasim, those that are gathered. It means the general context over here, vayafutsu, ovecha, is that they're gathered and we're asking them to be scattered. So Rashi Dafka leaves out the word elu. But when it comes to misanecha, misanecha is already a definition. What are misanecha? Who are the haters? Haters are people who are rotfecha. Like in Yiddish you say, ez roidef midiyadin. He's always chasing, he's involved, he's pursuing, he's on my back. Elu, these are roitfecha. It's a definition on the word, on what misanecha are. Those that have a hatred and therefore they're bent on the destruction of the Jewish people. But now Rashi has a kasha, a very big question. If this is the case, based on what we just said, that misanecha means hatred, with the hatred being bent on the destruction of who? Of the one you hate. So Rashi has a very big question. Oivecha, enemies, actively assaulting God. Oivecha, Rashi didn't have such a problem that you have people that act against God. We've always had, through history, we've always had people that do act up against God. Even we as Jewish people sometimes act up. On Yom Kippur, we say, one of the sins we say is pashati. What does pashati mean? Pashati means I've rebelled against you intentionally. Sometimes we also do things to spite Hashem. A person is provoked, a person gets angry. Our children do things to spite us sometimes. It's not because they hate us, because they're upset. Okay, your child can, you tell your child that it's his bedtime and he wants to still do whatever he's doing. He wants to play on the computer, whatever he's doing. You tell him to go to sleep, he'll scream, he'll shout, he'll kick, he'll scream. He'll say, I hate you, sometimes. Child, you can't let them take another cookie from the cookie jar. You take him off the swing in the park. A 2-3-year-old, he'll hit or scream or say something not nice to his parents. So he'll be engaged in an active assault, even though he doesn't hate his father or his mother, chas v'shalom. But right now, you provoked me. So there are people who have been provoked and are against the fight. Do something against Hashem. That's not unheard of. That makes sense. And we can also say those who fight the Jewish people are one of the ways of fighting against God is fighting the Jewish people. That's okay. But when it comes to misanecha, what does misanecha mean? A deep-rooted hatred that has that is where one is bent all the time with one intention of destruction and the desire to destroy. Rashi was bothered. How can you hate God that way? How can you hate Hashem? What does it mean? How can you hate? Someone who hates God. Let's try to define that. Obviously, it's a person who believes in Hashem. If he doesn't believe in Hashem, he doesn't hate him.
Because if you don't believe him, then God doesn't exist. There's no one to hate. It's not like, see, there are people who hate people that are religious. But then they're hating the people that are hating God. Because if they're atheists and they don't believe in God, then God doesn't exist. They don't hate him. If we're saying they're hating God means they recognize that he is God. If they recognize he is God, what does God mean? The definition, what does God mean? God means the creator of the universe. The creator of who? The creator of everybody, including those who hate him. How can you hate the hand that is feeding you? How can you hate the hand that created you? How can you hate the hand that gives you your very life? Doesn't make any sense. And more than that, how can you be bent on destroying your source? If you destroy your source, then you don't exist anymore. It's self-obliteration. You can't. It doesn't make any sense. So therefore, oivecha, an act of aggression against God, Rashi had no problem with. But misanecha, a hatred against Hashem, harboring and all day long contriving to get rid of Chas v'Sholem God, to get rid of, because you're bent on destruction. That's what misanecha means. Rashi's bothered. Who are those? So Rashi explains, yes, Elu Sayni Yisrael. Those are those who hate Israel. And Rashi has to explain, what does it mean to hate Israel? Shakol hasoynes Yisrael. Those who hate Israel, Soyne Misha Ama v'Hoya. And that's the reason why Rashi calls Hashem Misha Ama v'Hoya, the one who spoke and the world came into existence. Why is he using that term? Because he wants to emphasize the question. Misha Ama v'Hoya is, how can you hate the one who spoke and the world came into existence? It's hating your source. It's hating. You can't hate that. And the answer is yes, you can. By hating the Jewish people. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means that this irrational hatred, this irrational anti-Semitism, where people hate Jews, and we can't really explain why, it's really a hatred against God. And why then are the people not, why don't we see an active hatred against God? And the answer is because it's a subconscious hatred. It doesn't necessarily mean a conscious hatred. Because the mind is not allowing, the mind doesn't make any sense out of it. I mean, what am I hating God? How can I hate God? God is the creator of everything. How can I hate him? So consciously they can't hate God. So consciously you hate Jews. Because Jews are God's representative. Jews are God's people in the world. So Rashi is defining something. Rashi's saying you should know, if you get into the psychology of it, a hatred of the Jewish people because they're Jews means hating God. That's literally what it means. So, and here comes an amazing thing, sad thing. There is no other way of this level called sonecha, people that hate God, only in hating Jews. Because either you deny God's existence, or if you admit that God exists, you can't hate him. Yes, you can. You hate Jews, you're hating God. What does that mean? It's similar to, people always have grievances against airlines. People get upset against the airline, they go complain. So you have a complaint. You had a bad story on a flight. You had a stewardess or whatever, someone at the what do they call them? At the check-in, which was not nice to you. So you have a grievance. You call in. You complain. You write a letter to United, to American. Okay, is that a sign that you hate United and you hate American Airlines? No. But what happens if every time you see someone in a United uniform or an American uniform, you spit at them or curse them or say something like that? Then what is that a sign? It's a sign that you hate the company, you hate American Airlines. If every time you see a Jew, you mutter under your breath, if every time you see, if every Jew annoys you, what is that a sign? You hate the company. Who is the company? This is God's company. Jews are God's representatives in this world. Anti-Semitism. And even though the person himself will not admit that he hates God, he or she are hating God, and that's what they're hating the Jewish people. That's the true definition of anti-Semitism. The deeper anti-Semitism. And that is the differences over here we can see between all the questions that we asked before, between here and in Parshas Behaaloecha. In Parshas Behaaloecha, when it says Taharos, you see, over there when it's talking about Ovecha, you have to remember one thing. To be involved in an aggression against God doesn't always mean, it's not the only way that someone can fight God is by fighting the Jewish people. We found Nimrod, he fought God, and they weren't fighting the Jewish people, there were no Jews then in the world. They had their own war against God. That's possible. Again, an act of aggression, that's possible. So So when it comes to the Shira and it says Kamecha, those who get up against you, it doesn't by default mean those that are fighting the Jewish people. What then? In the Shira, it must mean. In that story, in the song by the Shira, over there, it must mean that those that it's talking about, those that are gods that are standing up against the Jewish people. Why? Because why are the Jewish people singing about it? We're singing Hashem for our salvation. Hashem destroyed our enemies. He destroyed Paro. So when it's Paro and the Egyptians, so we say, with your great power, or whatever, you demolish those who get up against you. So who are they? Who are we talking? So Rashi says, Rashi asks, Umiheim, and who are they? Who are they? What type of enemies? There could be many different types of enemies to God, those who fight in actuality against Hashem, many different ways. Mihem akamim kenegdoi, who those who get up to him now in the Shira. What are we talking about? So Rashi says, we're talking Elu akamim Yisroel, those who get up against the Jewish people are also getting up against God. But that's not the defining element of Komecha all the time. It's only over there talking about that type of a kamim, because that's why the Jews are singing about it. That's why Rashi also continues. Rashi doesn't say shenemar. Rashi says v'chein hu oimer, and so he says. The difference between shenemar and v'chein hu oimer is shenemar means this is proof. Shenemar, this is a raya, this is proof. When you say v'chein hu oimer means I'm finding a similarity. I'm finding elsewhere, v'chein hu oimer, elsewhere we also find something like this. It's not proof. So Rashi's saying we find elsewhere that an enemy of the Jew is an enemy of God. Where? It says so in Tehillim, that what? Kihine yavecha Hashem. Al amcha yarimu soid. Your enemies, God, they contrive against the Jewish people. So v'chein hu oimer, so we find elsewhere. But it's not that is what it is. However, when it comes over here, when we're talking about a deep animosity, a person living with this inner hatred and with the desire to fight God, to eradicate God, like a Hitler and the like, with that desire of destruction and destroying of Hashem in this world. Over here, it's not that there's the only one that there is, the only possibility for that is a believer in God and yet someone that hates him. The only possibility is Elu Sainei Yisrael. That's why Rashi doesn't ask the question. Mihem, who are they? Because he's not giving you a particular case over here. We're talking. He is defining the whole idea of Nisanecha only applies to Sainei Yisrael, those who hate the Jewish people. And that's why Rashi doesn't say V'chein hu oimer. Rashi says Shenema, as it says, because this is a direct proof. Umisanecha nasu roish, those who hate you have raised their heads. And what is their raising of their heads? Al amcha yarimu soid. On your nations they have picked up. They are contriving in secrecy. So that answers all these questions on what Rashi is saying. And over here there's something very, 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 very important. And a very, very important lesson for us, and an idea, and something that this leads us to the explanation of what this Sefer Vahi ben Soya is all about. You see, when Moshe Rabbeinu was asking Hashem now to defeat the enemies of Israel, you got to ask the question, that itself, why did Moshe Rabbeinu say, Kuma Hashem vayafutzu oivecha, let your enemies be destroyed. V'yanusu misanecha, let those who hate you be destroyed. True, we explain now that the enemies of Israel are also the enemies of God. But why couldn't Moshe Rabbeinu, why does he have to say that? Why can't he be clearer? Then we wouldn't need all this Rashi, and we wouldn't need this whole long shir. And it could have been straight. He could have said, Vayafutzu oiveinu, our enemies, and misaneinu. Why is Moshe Rabbeinu saying oivecha? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to protect the Jewish people in a particular situation. See, the Jewish people in this story over here were in a state where they were not deserving of Hashem's protection. Rashi says earlier, the reason why there's two nuns, one of the reasons is because the Torah wants to make a hefsek, a interruption between Puranis and Puranis. Jews were misbehaving. They misbehaved earlier. There was a sin that they did. Here's another sin. We were in sin mode. And because we were in sin mode, we were undeserving for miracles and for Hashem's protection. But Moshe Rabbeinu makes a very powerful argument. And Moshe Rabbeinu says that the Jewish people need your protection. Not because of their merit, not because they deserve, but because of your name, Hashem. Because of you. And the reason is because the nations of the world associate you with the Jewish people. They know that the Jews, that you are called Hashem Elokei Yisrael, Hashem the God of Israel. If the Jewish people will be defeated, if the Jewish people will be harmed, if the Jewish people will be trampled on, that's a trampling on your name. Because the nations in the world, they don't consider the contract that Hashem made with us. In Behaaloecha, if you'll keep my mitzvahs, Hashem will reward us. If chas v'shalom you don't keep, He's going to punish us. They don't make that differentiation. They know God and Israel, they're a couple. They're married together. And everybody in the world knows. Jews are uncomfortable. Jews are so uncomfortable in feeling that we're chosen by Hashem and we're Hashem's people. I mean, it could be because of thousands of years when we were persecuted because we're God's people, because we're special. So the average Jew today in America is uncomfortable with the idea that Jews are chosen. But non-Jews know that. And they know that very, very well. That the Jewish people are a chosen people. And they know that we belong to Hashem. And therefore, when they see, God forbid, that Jews can be trampled and Jews can be persecuted and Jews are weak, that's an indication to them that God is weak, that Hashem doesn't have any power. And that is why Moshe Rabbeinu says, Lama yoimru agoyim, why should, no, and David HaMelech in Tehillim keeps on repeating, Lama yoimru agoyim, why should the nations say, Aye Elokei, where is their God? Again, there's so many statements all over Tehillim. How chas v'shalom, because the destruction of the Jewish people is the greatest chilul Hashem possible. There is no greater desecration of Hashem's name. Just like we understand that the taking of Torah scrolls and being burnt, public burning of Torah scrolls that happened was a horrific desecration of Hashem's name. Even a greater desecration of Hashem's name is a desecration of the Jewish people. When Jews are destroyed, when Jews are massacred, and it could be that's the reason why Rashi was the one who deviated from the Sifri. And Rashi says not that those who are anti-Semites is because it's as if they messed with Hashem. But Rashi describes anti-Semitism as a war against God, is because Rashi lived through one of the most horrific periods in Jewish history when the Crusaders massacred. And Rashi saw anti-Semitism with its full development, and its full ugliness. So, the greatest Chilul Hashem, is when the desecration of God's name, when the Jewish people are cheapened, when Jews don't have respect in the world. It's a disrespect to Hashem. One of the greatest Chilul Hashems in world history was the Holocaust. Of course, we don't know the reasons for it, and our minds can't fathom it. We can never understand it until Mashiach comes. But one of the just like the Jewish people, aside for the horrible suffering, there was a desecration of the covet, of the honor of the Jewish people. It was a horrible desecration of Hashem's name. And in a sense, in the spiritual realms, the ministering angels above were mocking the Shekhinah, God, chas v'shalom. We're making fun of, take a look, you can't save your people. It was a horrible Chilul Hashem. It's quite possible, again, it's hard to know what's going on in God's mind. And we cannot know, we don't have, unless we have a prophet that tells us that what we saw after the Holocaust, that Hashem had provided such miracles for the Jewish people. Such miracles for the Jewish people. That which we haven't seen in history. In all of our history, in the long, we haven't seen such miracles like the miracles that Hashem has provided during the wars, the Israeli wars. I'm not talking about, per se, the establishment of the state of Israel. That's not the discussion now. That has its own. I'm not going into that. What's the content of that as it being a secular state, and what is the meaning of that? For that, there is such radical different opinions amongst Gedolei Yisrael what that is and how we should perceive that. I'm talking about just the fact that God saved the Jewish people in the miracles of the 6-Day War, in the miracles of Entebbe, in the miracles of the Gulf War, again and again. When Hashem stood by, or what looked like Hashem standing by during the Holocaust and allowed millions of Jews to be killed. Now again, God forbid, that too was Bahashgacha, that too was with divine providence in a way that we don't understand, but we're talking about what it looked like. What is the appearance in the world? It looked like Hashem can't help his people. Hashem can't help his children. And yet, just a few years later, is the greatest display of Hashem's involvement of miracles, of doing something so unbelievable for Yidden. It's possible to say, again, I didn't see this anywhere. It's just my own thought. It's possible to say that this was compensation in a sense, aside for compensation for the Jewish people, because we needed miracles. We needed a little love after such pain, after loss. But aside for that, just to raise Hashem's respect back in the world, that the world should respect Hashem for Hashem's power. It brought back, because when Jews are strong and when Jews are honored and when Jews are elevated, then Hashem is elevated. And that is the content of the Parsha of Behaaloecha. The content of the Parsha of Behaaloecha is Moshe Rabbeinu saying to Hashem, it doesn't make a difference, deserving or not deserving, where we stand. Kuma Hashem vayafutzu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha. Get up, Hashem. And they're very interesting. Moshe uses the term Kuma Hashem, get up, Hashem. What does it mean, get up? Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to call forth the essential bond that Hashem has with Yidden, in which we are his children, whether we behave or whether we don't behave. We're still his children. And that's the idea. Get up, Hashem. Rise to your essence. Rise to who you really are. Because here's the thing. Hashem, on a on a more external level, Hashem's relationship with the Jewish people is based on a contract. Keep my Torah, not keep my Torah. If you're not, we're at odds with each other. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, Kuma Hashem, get up, meaning rise up higher. Rise to your essence, to a place where your bond with us is so absolute, where it's beyond all cheshbonos, it's beyond all calculations and all considerations. It's we are your people, that which the non-Jews know, that no matter what, the Jewish people are God's people. And then from that place, you should feel that essential bond, and from there, be the guardian of Yidden, be the guardian of the Jewish people, because if not, God forbid, this is a chilul Hashem on the highest degree. And this is the message of Sefer Behaaloecha. That's the reason why it doesn't have any mitzvahs in it. The essence of this Sefer is the Sefer of Israel, of who Yidden are. That Yidden and Hashem are inseparable. It's higher than our connection to Hashem that comes through Torah and mitzvahs. It's the Parsha, the Sefer of the Jew, and it has two messages. It has a message to the non-Jews in the world that they ought to know and they need to understand that messing with the Jewish people is an outright assault against God. That if they're chas v'shalom planning to attack, to assault the Jewish people, it is an outright, direct, waging war against Hashem himself. Number one. And therefore we have to say to them, Al tigu b'mashiachai, do not touch my anointed ones. U'b'nevi'ai, my prophets, al tareyu. But there's another message over here, and that is one that the Parsha expresses in terms of Hashem. That Hashem, on his part, we cry out to Hashem all the time, and we say, Aseh laman rachamecha, Aseh laman shimcha hagadol. Do it in honor of your great name. Aseh lamancha, do it for you, loy lamanenu, not for us. Don't let your name be desecrated. The protection of the Jewish peoples, all other calculations are irrelevant. Now when we have such enemies of the Jewish people are surrounding us from all sides, we deserve God's protection, if not for anything other than this is something about Hashem's honor and Hashem's respect and Hashem's glory in the world. As we continuously repeat in davening, Lo lanu Hashem, don't do it for our sake, ki l'shimcha tein kavod. For your name, give honor and give glory. May we merit to see the rising of Hashem's honor as a result of the rising of the Jewish people in the world. May those who hate the Jewish people be nullified, destroyed, eradicated instantly, even before they can even think of attacking the Jewish people. May they be shattered to pieces. May the revelation of Hashem's glory and the glory of the Jewish people be revealed